The late autumn wind cut through the Montana Valley like a knife, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. Eleanor Mitchell pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, her boots crunching against the frozen ground as she stumbled forward. She had been walking for 3 days now, ever since the stagecoach had left her stranded in the middle of nowhere when she couldn't pay the remainder of her fare. Her vision blurred at the edges, and her stomach cramped with a hunger so fierce it made her lightheaded. When was the last time she'd eaten? Yesterday morning, she thought. Or was it the day before? A stale biscuit someone had dropped near the general store 2 towns back. Through the gathering dusk, she spotted a light, a cabin, sturdy and well-built, smoke rising from its chimney in a grey column against the darkening sky. Eleanor's knees nearly buckled with relief. She didn't care who lived there. She would beg if she had to, anything for a crust of bread, a sip of water. She forced her legs to move, one foot in front of the other, across the final stretch of rocky terrain. The cabin grew larger, closer. She could see a barn behind it, hear the distant lowing of cattle. A ranch, then. Perhaps they needed help, a cook, a maid, anything. Eleanor reached the porch steps and grasped the railing, pulling herself up. The world tilted sideways. She managed to raise her fist and knock once, twice, before her legs gave out entirely. The last thing she felt was the hard wood of the porch against her cheek, and then darkness swallowed her whole. Inside the cabin, Marcus Cole set down the axe he'd been sharpening and frowned. Had someone knocked? Out here, miles from the nearest town, visitors were rarer than hen's teeth. He stood, his massive frame unfolding from the chair, and crossed to the door in 3 long strides. When he opened it, he looked around, seeing nothing at first. Then his gaze dropped and his breath caught in his throat. A woman lay crumpled on his porch, her face pale as winter snow, her lips tinged with blue. Her clothes were little more than rags, torn and filthy from days of travel. One of her boots had a hole in the sole. "Jesus," Marcus muttered, dropping to one knee beside her. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat, feeling for a pulse. It was there, thank God, weak and thready but steady. He slipped one arm beneath her shoulders, the other under her knees, and lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. She was light. Too light. He could feel every bone in her body through the thin fabric of her dress. His jaw tightened as he carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind him. He laid her on the sofa near the fire and grabbed a blanket from the back of his chair, tucking it around her. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Marcus fetched a cup of water and a cloth, dampening it to wipe the dirt from her face. Up close, he could see she was young, maybe 22 or 23. Dark hair escaped from a braid that had come mostly undone. Delicate features, high cheekbones, a stubborn chin. "Come on now," he murmured, supporting her head as he brought the cup to her lips. Just a sip. The water touched her mouth and she stirred, her throat working as she swallowed instinctively. Her eyes opened, unfocused and confused. They were the color of whiskey, amber and gold in the firelight. "Easy," Marcus said quietly. "You're safe." Eleanor blinked up at the man hovering over her, and her first thought was that she must be dreaming or dead, because surely no man that large could be real. He had to be 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that blocked out the rest of the room. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes were a startling blue, like a summer sky she hadn't seen in months. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I'll go." She tried to sit up, and the room spun violently. Strong hands caught her shoulders, easing her back down. "You're not going anywhere," Marcus said firmly. "Not in your condition." "I can pay," Eleanor lied, desperately. "I have money. I just need—" "When's the last time you ate?" The question was so direct it stopped her mid-sentence. She stared at him, and to her horror felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She would not cry. She had survived worse than this. She had survived her father dying and leaving her with nothing. She had survived the journey west on promises of work that never materialized. She had survived 3 days walking through wilderness that could have killed her a dozen times over. But something about the gentleness in this stranger's voice, the concern in those blue eyes, cracked something inside her. "I don't remember," she whispered. Marcus muttered something under his breath that might have been a curse. He stood and crossed to the kitchen area of the cabin, moving with surprising grace for such a big man. Eleanor watched as he stoked the fire in the stove and began pulling out ingredients: bread, butter, eggs, a jar of preserved vegetables. "What's your name?" he asked without turning around. "Eleanor Mitchell. I'm Marcus Cole. This is my ranch." He cracked eggs into a pan, the sizzle filling the cabin. "How'd you end up on my porch, Eleanor Mitchell?" The smell of cooking food made her stomach clench painfully. She swallowed hard. "The stagecoach. I was heading to Redemption Creek, to a position as a governess, but I couldn't pay the full fare, and the driver left me at a way station 30 miles back. I've been walking." Marcus turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. 30 miles in 3 days? "I got lost," she admitted. "Took a wrong turn, I think. Yesterday, or the day before." He shook his head and returned his attention to the stove. A few minutes later, he brought her a plate heaped with scrambled eggs, thick slices of buttered bread, and vegetables. The scent alone made her dizzy with longing. "Eat slowly," Marcus warned. "Your stomach won't take kindly to too much at once." Eleanor nodded, taking the plate with trembling hands. The first bite of egg was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. She had to force herself to chew slowly, to not shovel it all into her mouth at once. Marcus watched her for a moment, then poured himself a cup of coffee and sat in the chair across from her. "This governess position," he said. "You have it in writing?" Eleanor paused mid-bite. "A letter. It was in my bag." "Where's your bag?" I don't know. I must have dropped it somewhere on the trail." Marcus's jaw tightened. "So you have no money, no belongings, no proof of employment, and nowhere to go." It sounded even worse when he said it out loud. Eleanor set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone despite her hunger. "I'll find a way. I always do. If you could just point me toward Redemption Creek in the morning." "Redemption Creek is 40 miles from here, and there's a storm coming." Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. "Even if there was a governess position waiting for you there, which I doubt, you wouldn't make it halfway before the snow hit." Eleanor felt panic rising in her chest. "I can't stay here. I won't impose on your charity. I'll work for my keep. I can clean. I can cook." "Can you?" Marcus turned to face her, one eyebrow raised. "Cook? Yes." She lifted her chin. "My mother taught me. Before she died, I ran our household for 3 years." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying her. Eleanor met his gaze, refusing to look away, even though something about his intense stare made her heart beat faster. "All right," he said finally. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay here until you're recovered and until the weather clears. In exchange, you'll help with the cooking and the household work. I'm not much of a cook myself, and this place could use a woman's touch. I couldn't possibly—" "You can, and you will." His voice was firm but not unkind. "I'm not sending you back out there to die, Eleanor, and you're in no condition to argue with me." She wanted to argue anyway, wanted to maintain some shred of dignity and independence. But the truth was, she had neither. She was at this man's mercy, and they both knew it. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll work hard, I promise." "I don't doubt it." Marcus gestured to the plate. "Finish eating, then you can have the bed. I'll sleep out here." "No, I couldn't take your bed. Eleanor." He fixed her with that intense blue stare again. "You're not leaving here until I say so. And while you're under my roof, you'll do as I tell you, starting with eating that food and getting some proper rest." "Understood." There was something about the way he said it, with absolute authority but also care, that made Eleanor's protest die on her lips. She nodded and picked up her fork again. As she ate, she snuck glances at him. Marcus had returned to sharpening his axe, the rhythmic scrape of stone against metal filling the comfortable silence. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way. Strong features, a jaw shadowed with stubble, hands that were large and calloused but moved with surprising precision. She wondered what his story was. Why a man like him, clearly capable and prosperous enough to own a ranch, was living alone out here in the middle of nowhere. No wife, no family that she could see, just him and the cattle and the wind. When she finished eating, Marcus took her plate and helped her to her feet. Eleanor swayed, still weak, and his hand shot out to steady her. His palm was warm against her arm, and she was suddenly very aware of how small she was compared to him. The top of her head barely reached his shoulder. "Careful," he murmured. "Your body's been through a lot." He guided her to a small room off the main living area. The bed was simple but clean, with thick quilts piled high. Eleanor had never seen anything more inviting. "There's a wash basin there," Marcus said, pointing. "Water in the pitcher. I'll bring you some clean clothes. They'll be too big, but they're better than what you're wearing." Eleanor looked down at her filthy dress and felt heat rise to her cheeks. She must look like a ragamuffin, worse than a ragamuffin, a beggar. "Thank you," she said again, because she didn't know what else to say. Marcus nodded and left, returning a moment later with a large shirt and a pair of wool socks. "These will have to do for tonight. Tomorrow we can see about something more suitable." After he closed the door, Eleanor stripped off her ruined clothes with shaking hands. She washed as best she could with the cold water, scrubbing away days of dirt and fear. Marcus's shirt fell to her knees, the sleeves dangling well past her fingertips. She rolled them up and climbed into bed, pulling the quilts up to her chin. The mattress was soft, the blankets warm, and for the first time in months, Eleanor felt safe. She closed her eyes, intending to stay awake long enough to figure out what she would do next, how she would repay this stranger's kindness. Instead, she fell asleep between one breath and the next, and didn't wake until morning. Marcus stood outside the bedroom door for a long moment, after he heard her breathing even out into sleep. He ran a hand through his hair and exhaled slowly. What the hell was he doing? Taking in a strange woman, offering her shelter and food and protection. But what else could he have done? Left her to die on his porch? Sent her back out into the wilderness? No, he wasn't that kind of man. Even after everything that had happened, even after losing Emma and the baby, he wasn't so broken that he could turn away someone in need. Still, having Eleanor here complicated things. He'd gotten used to the solitude, to the silence, used to not having to talk to anyone or explain himself or worry about anyone but the livestock. He thought about the way she'd looked at him, those whiskey-colored eyes wide with fear and gratitude. She was beautiful, he'd noticed, even half-starved and covered in dirt. Delicate features, soft skin where it wasn't chapped from exposure. When he'd lifted her, she'd felt like she might break in his arms. Marcus shook his head, dispelling the thought. She was here out of necessity, nothing more. She'd recover, the weather would clear, and she'd move on to wherever she was really headed. He'd give her some money for the journey, make sure she had proper supplies, and that would be the end of it. He settled onto the sofa, pulling a blanket over himself. Through the window he could see the first snowflakes beginning to fall, illuminated by the moonlight. The storm was coming right on schedule. It looked like Eleanor Mitchell would be his guest for a while, whether either of them liked it or not. Eleanor woke to pale morning light, filtering through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then memory returned in a rush, and she sat up quickly, her heart pounding. Marcus's cabin. She'd collapsed on his porch. He'd taken her in. She climbed out of bed, her legs still shaky but stronger than they'd been last night. Looking around the small room, she noticed details she'd missed in her exhausted state. A simple dresser, a mirror on the wall, a rag rug on the floor. Everything was clean and well maintained, but there was something impersonal about it, as if no one had truly lived in this room for a long time. Eleanor rolled up the sleeves of Marcus's shirt once more and ventured out into the main room. She found him at the table, a cup of coffee in his hand, looking over what appeared to be account books. He glanced up when she entered, his blue eyes tracking her movement. "Morning," he said. "How do you feel?" "Better. Much better, thank you." Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly self-conscious in the oversized shirt. "I should start on breakfast. And the cleaning. I meant what I said about earning my keep." Marcus closed the ledger and stood. "First, we need to get you some proper clothes. I've got some things packed away that might work. They belong to—" He paused, something painful flickering across his face. "Someone who used to live here. They'll fit you better than my shirt. I don't want to intrude on—" "You're not." His tone was final. He crossed to a large trunk in the corner and opened it, pulling out dresses, petticoats, and other garments. "Take what you need. The rest will just sit here gathering dust." Eleanor approached slowly, running her fingers over the fabric. The clothes were simple but well made, much finer than anything she'd owned in years. "Who did these belong to?" "My wife." Marcus's voice was flat. "She died 2 years ago. Her and our son." Eleanor's hand froze on a blue calico dress. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "How could you?" He shoved the trunk toward her. "Get dressed. Then we'll talk about what comes next." He left the cabin before she could respond, the door closing firmly behind him. Eleanor stared after him, her heart aching for the pain she'd heard beneath his gruff words. A wife and child, both gone. No wonder he lived out here alone, keeping the world at arm's length. She selected the plainest dress she could find, a grey wool that looked warm and practical, along with proper undergarments. Everything fit reasonably well, though the dress was a bit loose in the waist. Marcus's wife must have been a little heavier than Eleanor, or perhaps Eleanor was simply thinner than she should be. When she emerged from the bedroom, properly dressed, Marcus had returned and was building up the fire. He straightened when he saw her, his gaze sweeping over her in a way that made heat rise to her cheeks. "Better," he said gruffly. "More appropriate, anyway." Eleanor smoothed down the skirt. "Thank you. For everything. The clothes, the food, the shelter. I know I keep saying it, but I truly am grateful." "Then show it by helping out like you promised." Marcus gestured toward the kitchen area. "There's flour, lard, eggs, whatever you need. I'll be in the barn seeing to the animals." He left again, and Eleanor got to work. The kitchen was surprisingly well stocked for a bachelor household. As she mixed biscuit dough and fried bacon, she looked around the cabin with new eyes. It was tidy but sparse, lacking the small touches that made a house a home. No curtains on the windows, no flowers, no photographs or mementos. It was as if Marcus had stripped away anything that might remind him of what he'd lost. By the time he returned, stamping snow from his boots, Eleanor had breakfast laid out on the table: biscuits, bacon, scrambled eggs, and fresh coffee. It was the first real meal she'd cooked in months, and despite everything, she felt a small surge of pride. Marcus paused in the doorway, staring at the spread. "Smells good," he said finally. They ate in silence, Eleanor acutely aware of his presence across the table. He was even bigger than she'd realized, his shoulders so broad they made the chair look small. His hands dwarfed the coffee cup he held, but despite his size, there was nothing clumsy or brutish about him. He moved with control, with deliberation. "The storm's getting worse," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "We might be snowed in for a week or more." Eleanor's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "A week? Maybe longer. It's early in the season for a storm like this, but when they hit hard." He met her eyes across the table. "That going to be a problem?" What could she say? That yes, it was a problem because she had nowhere to go and no money, and being trapped in close quarters with a man she barely knew terrified her. That despite his kindness, she didn't know if she could trust him. But looking into those steady blue eyes, Eleanor found herself saying, "No, It's not a problem, Marcus nodded. Good. Then we'll make the best of it. The days fell into a rhythm. Eleanor rose early and made breakfast while Marcus tended the animals. She spent her mornings cleaning and organizing the cabin, bringing small touches of warmth to the stark space. A tablecloth she found in the trunk. Wildflowers, dried but still lovely, arranged in a jar. The windows washed until they sparkled. Marcus said nothing about the changes, but she noticed him pause sometimes, looking around as if seeing the place for the first time. In the afternoons, she cooked while he worked on ranch business or repairs around the property. The storm raged outside, piling snow higher against the walls, but inside the cabin was warm and dry and almost comfortable. They talked more as the days passed, small conversations at first, about the weather and the food and the work that needed doing. Then deeper ones, in the evenings when they sat by the fire. Eleanor learned that Marcus had built this ranch from nothing, clearing the land and raising the cabin with his own hands, that he'd met his wife, Emma, in town and married her within 3 months, that she'd died giving birth to their son, who'd lived only a few hours before following her. "I couldn't save them," Marcus said one night, staring into the flames. "Couldn't do anything but watch them slip away." "It wasn't your fault," Eleanor said softly. "Doesn't matter. They're still gone." He looked at her, his eyes shadowed. "After that, I didn't see much point in anything. Kept the ranch running because I didn't know what else to do, but I stopped caring about most everything else." Eleanor understood that kind of grief, the kind that hollowed you out and left you functioning but not truly living. She told him about her own losses, her mother's long illness and death, her father's decline afterward, how he'd lost himself in drink and gambling until there was nothing left but debts and shame. "When he died, I had to sell everything just to pay what he owed," she explained. "The house, the furniture, my mother's jewelry, everything. I was left with a single trunk of clothes and enough money to buy a stagecoach ticket west. And the governor's position." Eleanor looked down at her hands. "There never was one. I made it up. Thought if I could just get to a new town, I could find work, start over. But the money ran out faster than I expected," and she shrugged helplessly. "And you ended up on my porch, half dead." "Yes." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm glad you did." Eleanor's head snapped up, her eyes meeting his. There was something in his gaze that made her breath catch, something warm and intense that she didn't quite know how to interpret. "Are you?" she asked quietly. "This place has been dead for 2 years. Just me and the ghosts rattling around." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Having you here, it's like remembering what it's supposed to be like. A home, not just a house." Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. "Marcus, I know it's only temporary," he continued. "I know once the storm clears, you'll want to move on, find that fresh start you're looking for. But while you're here, I just want you to know I'm grateful too." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Eleanor couldn't name. She was aware of how close they were sitting, how the firelight cast shadows across Marcus's strong features, how those blue eyes seemed to see straight through her. She stood abruptly. "I should check on the bread for tomorrow. I put dough to rise earlier." If Marcus was disappointed by her retreat, he didn't show it. He just nodded and turned back to the fire, leaving Eleanor to flee to the kitchen on shaking legs. That night, lying in bed, Eleanor stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of what she was feeling. She'd been here less than a week, and already she couldn't imagine leaving. Couldn't imagine going back to being alone, to struggling and scraping by. But more than that, she couldn't imagine not seeing Marcus every day, not hearing his deep voice or watching the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he almost smiled, not feeling the way her heart sped up when he looked at her, really looked at her, like she was something precious and worth protecting. It was foolish, dangerous even. She barely knew him, and he'd made it clear this arrangement was temporary. Except, had he? That conversation by the fire hadn't sounded temporary. It had sounded like a man who was starting to hope again. Eleanor pulled the quilts up to her chin and tried to sleep, but her mind kept replaying the warmth in Marcus's eyes, the gentleness in his voice when he'd said he was glad she'd come. The next morning, Eleanor woke to find the snow had finally stopped. Through the window, she could see brilliant blue sky and sunshine glinting off white drifts that reached nearly to the cabin's eaves. It was beautiful and pristine, and it filled her with an inexplicable sadness. The storm was over, which meant she had no excuse to stay. She found Marcus outside, shoveling a path to the barn. He'd already cleared the porch and part of the yard, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. He looked up when she stepped outside, and something flickered across his face too quickly for her to read. "Morning," he said. "Figured I'd better dig us out before the next storm hits." "Is there another one coming?" "Always is this time of year." He drove the shovel into a snowbank and leaned on it. "But we should have a clear spell for a few days at least, long enough for the roads to be passable again." There it was, the acknowledgement that she could leave now if she wanted to. "I could head to Redemption Creek," Eleanor said, hating how small her voice sounded. "See if there's work there." Marcus's jaw tightened. "That what you want to do?" "I don't know what I want." The admission came out before she could stop it. "A week ago, I just wanted to survive. Wanted a warm place to sleep and food in my belly. But now..." "Now?" Eleanor looked up at him, at this man who'd saved her life and given her shelter and somehow, impossibly, become important to her in the span of a few days. "Now, I don't want to leave." The words hung in the cold air between them. Marcus set down the shovel and took a step toward her, then another, until he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Then don't," he said roughly. "Stay." "I can't just stay, Marcus. People would talk. It wouldn't be proper." "Since when do I care what people think?" His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin. The touch was gentle, reverent, and it made Eleanor's knees weak. "You said this place feels like a home with you in it. You were right, and I don't want to go back to how it was before, empty and cold and lonely." "What are you saying?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I'm saying, marry me. Stay here as my wife, not my housekeeper. Help me make this ranch into something worth having again. Let me take care of you the way you deserve to be taken care of." Eleanor's heart stopped, then started again, racing. "You can't be serious. We barely know each other. I know enough. I know you're strong and brave and kind. I know you work hard and don't complain. I know you've brought light back into my life when I thought it was gone forever." His other hand came up to frame her face. "I know it's fast, and I know you probably think I'm crazy, but I mean it, Eleanor. Marry me." She should say no. It was insane. A week ago, she didn't know this man existed, and now he was proposing marriage. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw sincerity and hope, and something that looked like the beginning of love. She thought about how safe she felt here, how right it seemed when she woke up and made breakfast and heard Marcus's footsteps on the porch. She thought about going back to being alone, to wandering from town to town with no purpose and no one who cared if she lived or died. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Marcus's face transformed, a genuine smile breaking across his features for the first time since she'd met him. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, and Eleanor pressed her face against his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady beneath her cheek. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "I swear I'll do everything I can to make you happy, to give you the life you deserve." "You already have," Eleanor said, and meant it. They stood there in the snow, holding each other, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, and the world sparkled around them like a promise of new beginnings. The wedding was simple. They rode to town the following week, once the roads had cleared enough to make the journey safely. The preacher married them in his small church with his wife and the shopkeeper as witnesses. Eleanor wore one of Emma's dresses, a soft blue that Marcus said brought out the gold in her eyes. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Marcus kissed her gently, carefully, as if she might break. Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. On the ride back to the ranch, sitting beside Marcus in the wagon, Eleanor kept glancing at the ring on her finger. It was simple, a gold band that Marcus said had belonged to his grandmother. It caught the light as they traveled, winking like a small sun. "Having second thoughts?" Marcus asked, noticing her attention. "No, just making sure it's real." He reached over and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "It's real. You're my wife now, Eleanor Cole. For better or worse." "For better," she said firmly. "Definitely for better." The wagon hit a rut, and Eleanor swayed, her shoulder bumping against Marcus's arm. He steadied her with one hand while keeping hold of the reins with the other. The contact sent warmth spreading through her chest, and she found herself leaning slightly closer to him, drawn by his solid presence. "Cold?" Marcus asked, misinterpreting her movement. "A little," Eleanor lied, though in truth the proximity to him made her feel anything but cold. Without a word, Marcus shrugged out of his heavy coat and draped it around her shoulders. It was still warm from his body and smelled like leather and pine and something uniquely him. Eleanor pulled it closer, breathing in the scent. "Thank you," she murmured. "Can't have my wife catching her death on our wedding day." There was something in his voice, a roughness, that made the word wife sound intimate and possessive. Eleanor's heart fluttered. She was someone's wife now, Marcus Cole's wife. The thought filled her with equal parts excitement and nervousness. What did he expect from her? What did marriage to him truly mean beyond the practical arrangement they'd agreed to? As if sensing her thoughts, Marcus said quietly, "I know this all happened fast. Too fast, probably. But I meant what I said, Eleanor. I'll be good to you. I'll take care of you. You don't have to worry about anything." "I'm not worried," she said, and realized it was true. Despite everything, despite barely knowing this man, she felt safe with him in a way she'd never felt with anyone. They arrived at the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink. Marcus helped Eleanor down from the wagon, his large hands spanning her waist, and for a moment they stood there in the fading light, looking at each other. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cole," Marcus said softly. Eleanor smiled. "It feels like home already." Day. The first weeks of their marriage were an adjustment. Marcus had lived alone for so long that having someone else in his space took getting used to. But he found he didn't mind the small inconveniences. Coming home to find Eleanor's things scattered around, hearing her humming while she worked, the way she'd reorganized his kitchen to suit her own logic. What surprised him most was how natural it felt, how right. He'd loved Emma, truly loved her, but that had been a young man's love, full of passion and dreams, but little practicality. With Eleanor it was different, steadier, built on mutual respect and understanding and need. They slept in separate beds at first. Marcus insisted, not wanting to pressure her into anything she wasn't ready for. Eleanor was his wife in name, but he knew it would take time for her to trust him fully, to see him as more than just the man who'd saved her. But as winter deepened and the nights grew colder, the distance between them began to feel less necessary and more like an obstacle. Eleanor found herself lying awake at night, listening to Marcus's breathing from the other room, wondering what it would be like to fall asleep in his arms. She'd catch herself watching him during the day, admiring the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt as he worked, the concentration on his face when he was reading his account books, the rare smile that transformed his stern features. One morning, she was making bread when Marcus came in from the barn, stamping snow from his boots. He was rubbing his hands together, trying to warm them. "Cold out there?" Eleanor asked, though she could see the answer in the redness of his cheeks and nose. "Bitter, lost feeling in my fingers about an hour ago." He held his hands toward the stove, flexing them slowly. Eleanor wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and crossed to him. "Here, let me." She took his hands in hers, rubbing them gently to restore circulation. His fingers were like ice, rough with calluses, but long and elegant despite their size. Marcus watched her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You don't have to," he said quietly. "I want to." Eleanor kept her eyes on his hands, not trusting herself to meet his gaze. "You work so hard. Someone should take care of you." "I'm used to taking care of myself." "Well, now you have me." She looked up then, meeting those blue eyes. "That's what marriage means, isn't it? Taking care of each other." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. He turned one hand in her grasp, threading his fingers through hers. "Eleanor." The moment was broken by a loud pop from the fireplace, a log splitting and sending up a shower of sparks. They both jumped, and Eleanor stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they'd been standing. "The bread," she stammered, returning to the counter. Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. "I have work to do anyway." But for the rest of the day, Eleanor could still feel the warmth of his hands in hers, could still see the way he'd looked at her with something like longing. The pattern continued over the following weeks. Small moments of connection, of awareness, building between them like pressure before a storm. A brush of hands when they both reached for something. Marcus's steadying touch on her back as she climbed over a snowdrift. The way his gaze would linger on her when he thought she wasn't looking. Eleanor found herself growing bolder. She'd touch his arm when she spoke to him, stand just a little closer than necessary, wear her hair down in the evenings instead of pinned up, because she'd noticed the way his eyes followed its movement. Marcus, for his part, was clearly exercising iron control. There was a tension in him, a careful restraint that made Eleanor wonder what would happen if it ever broke. One evening, about 3 weeks after the wedding, they were sitting by the fire. Eleanor was mending one of Marcus's shirts, and he was working on a piece of leather tack that needed repair. The silence between them was comfortable, domestic, but charged with unspoken things. "Eleanor," Marcus said suddenly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy here?" She looked up from her sewing, surprised. "Yes, very much so. Why do you ask?" Marcus set down the tack, his expression serious. "Because I need to know. If this isn't what you want, if you're just staying because you feel obligated, or because you think you have no other choice, that's not it at all." Eleanor set aside her mending and moved to kneel beside his chair. "Marcus, I'm here because I want to be, because this feels more like home than anywhere I've ever been, because you—" She took a breath, gathering her courage. "Because you make me feel safe and valued and cared for. I haven't felt that way in years." He reached out to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin. "You deserve to feel that way. Every day of your life." "So do you," Eleanor whispered. "You deserve to be happy too, Marcus. To have someone who cares about you, who wants to build a life with you." "Is that what you want? To build a life with me?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. Marcus pulled her up onto his lap, settling her against his chest. Eleanor went willingly, resting her head on his shoulder. His heart was beating fast beneath her ear, and his arms around her were strong and sure. "I'm afraid," he admitted quietly. "Afraid of caring too much, of losing someone again." "I'm afraid too," Eleanor confessed, "but I think being afraid and being alone are two different kinds of pain, and I'd rather face the fear with you than hide from it by myself." They sat like that for a long time, just holding each other, the fire crackling beside them. It wasn't passion or grand declarations. It was simply two people finding comfort and connection in each other's presence. But it was enough, more than enough. As the weeks turned into a month, then 6 weeks, Eleanor and Marcus grew more comfortable with each other. They developed routines and rhythms, learned each other's moods and preferences. Eleanor discovered that Marcus was gruff in the mornings until he'd had his coffee, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, that he loved to read but was self-conscious about it because he'd had little formal education. Marcus learned that Eleanor sang to herself when she was happy, that she had a stubborn streak a mile wide despite her gentle demeanor, that she was terrified of thunderstorms, but would never admit it. They still slept apart, but the line between them was growing thinner. One particularly cold night, Eleanor was jolted awake by a nightmare. She'd been back on the trail, starving and lost, unable to find the cabin no matter how far she walked. In the dream, she'd collapsed in the snow and no one had come to save her. She sat up in bed, her heart racing, and wrapped her arms around herself. The room was dark and cold, and suddenly the solitude felt suffocating. Before she could talk herself out of it, Eleanor got up and padded quietly to the main room. Marcus was asleep on the sofa, one arm thrown over his head, his chest rising and falling steadily. "Marcus," she whispered. He woke instantly, sitting up. "Eleanor, what's wrong?" I had a bad dream. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have woken you." Marcus swung his legs to the floor. "Come here." She hesitated only a moment before crossing to him. He pulled her down to sit beside him, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. "Tell me about it," he said gently. Eleanor described the dream, feeling foolish even as she spoke. "It's silly. I'm safe now. I know that." "It's not silly. You went through something terrifying. Of course it's still with you." Marcus's arm tightened around her. "But you're not alone anymore, Eleanor. You're never going to be alone like that again. I promise you." "I know. Sometimes I worry I'll wake up and none of this will be real. That you won't be real." Marcus took her hand and pressed it against his chest, over his heart. "I'm real. Feel that? I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." The steady thump of his heartbeat beneath her palm grounded her, pulled her back from the lingering edges of the nightmare. Eleanor leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the strength in his arms. "Can I stay here?" she asked quietly. "Just for tonight?" "You can stay here every night if you want to," Marcus replied. "Whatever makes you feel safe." They settled onto the sofa together, Eleanor curled against Marcus's side, his arms around her. She should have felt awkward or nervous, but instead she felt only peace. This was where she belonged. "Marcus," she murmured, already half asleep. "Yeah?" "Thank you. For everything." His lips pressed against the top of her head. "Sleep, sweetheart. I've got you." Eleanor drifted off with a smile on her face, surrounded by warmth and safety and the beginning of something that felt a lot like love. When morning came, they woke tangled together, the early light filtering through the windows. Eleanor blinked her eyes open to find Marcus already awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her heart ache. "Good morning," he said softly. "Morning." Eleanor didn't move away, didn't put distance between them. "I slept well." "Good." His hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Eleanor, what is it?" Marcus seemed to be struggling with something, his jaw working. Finally, he said, "Would you want to move your things out here? Sleep in the bed with me, I mean, as husband and wife should." Eleanor's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure I can't keep pretending this is just a practical arrangement. I'm sure I want my wife in my bed, even if all we do is sleep." His eyes searched hers. "But only if you want that too." In answer, Eleanor leaned up and kissed him. It was brief, chaste, but full of promise. "I want that," she whispered against his lips. "I want you." Marcus groaned, pulling her closer for a deeper kiss. His mouth moved over hers with barely restrained hunger, and Eleanor responded eagerly, her fingers curling into his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably take things slow." "Probably," Eleanor agreed, though slow was the last thing she wanted. "But damn, woman, you make that difficult." She laughed, delighted by his obvious desire for her. After feeling unwanted and worthless for so long, it was intoxicating to have someone look at her the way Marcus did, like she was something precious and irresistible. They spent that day moving Eleanor's meager belongings to the main bedroom. It didn't take long. She had so little, But Marcus insisted on making space for her things, rearranging drawers and clearing hooks for her dresses. "This is your room too now," he said firmly. "Your home. I want you to feel like it belongs to you." That night, they lay in bed together for the first time as a married couple. Marcus kept his promise to take things slow, simply holding Eleanor close, her back against his chest, his arm draped over her waist. But Eleanor could feel the evidence of his desire pressing against her, could hear the slight strain in his breathing. It made her feel powerful and wanted and brave. "Marcus," she said into the darkness, "I'm not fragile, you know. I won't break." His arm tightened around her. "I know that. But I also know you've been through a lot. I don't want to rush you into anything." Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. "What if I don't want to wait?" Even in the dim light, she could see the way his eyes darkened with want. "Eleanor, I trust you," she said simply. "And I want you." "Isn't that enough?" Marcus's control wavered. She could see it in the tension of his jaw, the way his fingers flexed against her hip. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, no longer holding back. His hands roamed over her body, learning her curves through the thin fabric of her nightgown. Eleanor gasped and arched into his touch, her own hands exploring the hard planes of his chest and shoulders. "Tell me if I do anything you don't like," Marcus murmured against her throat. "Tell me if I hurt you." "You won't hurt me," Eleanor breathed. "I know you won't." And he didn't. He was gentle and patient, taking his time despite his obvious need, making sure she was ready for each new sensation. Eleanor had been nervous about this part of marriage, had heard whispered stories from other women about pain and discomfort. But with Marcus, there was only pleasure. The sweet ache of being filled, the building tension as they moved together, the overwhelming intimacy of being so completely joined with another person. When release finally crashed over her, Eleanor cried out, clinging to Marcus as waves of pleasure rolled through her body. He followed moments later, his face buried in her neck, her name on his lips like a prayer. Afterward, Marcus gathered her close, pressing soft kisses to her forehead and cheeks and lips. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Better than all right." Eleanor smiled up at him. I never knew it could be like that." "Like what?" "Beautiful, meaningful." She traced her fingers along his jaw. "I love you, Marcus. I think I've loved you for a while now, but I was too afraid to say it." Marcus's eyes shone in the darkness. "I love you too. God, Eleanor, I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Don't be scared," she whispered. "We're in this together, remember?" "Together," he agreed, kissing her again. "Always." It was Eleanor who breached it first. She came to him one night when a blizzard raged outside, the wind howling so loudly it seemed like the cabin might blow away. Marcus was in his makeshift bed on the sofa, trying to read by lamplight, when he heard her door open. She stood in the doorway, in her nightgown, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. "I can't sleep," she said. "The wind sounds like it's screaming." Marcus set down his book. "It'll pass. Storm should be gone by morning." "I know, but—" She twisted her hands together. "Could I stay out here with you just until I fall asleep?" He should say no, should maintain the boundaries they'd established. But the words that came out were, "Of course." Eleanor crossed to the sofa and sat beside him, not touching, but close enough that he could feel the warmth of her. She pulled a blanket around her shoulders and stared into the dying fire. "Tell me about Emma," she said quietly. Marcus tensed. "Why?" "Because she was your wife. Because part of you will always love her. And because I want to understand who you were before you became the man I know." He was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then he said, "She was young, 19 when we married, full of dreams about what life on a ranch would be like. The reality was harder than she expected. Did she regret marrying you? I don't think so, but she was lonely. The isolation wore on her. She wanted children, wanted a family to fill the silence." His voice roughened. "When she got pregnant, she was so happy. Happier than I'd ever seen her. She had names picked out, had already started sewing baby clothes, and then she died." The baby was breech, couldn't turn him. The doctor tried everything, but it was too late. She bled out right there in our bed, and there was nothing I could do but hold her hand and watch. Marcus closed his eyes. The baby lived for a few hours, long enough for me to hold him, to see that he had her eyes. Then he just stopped breathing. Eleanor's hand found his in the darkness, squeezing tight. "I'm so sorry." I buried them together, out past the north pasture. Sometimes I still go out there and talk to them, tell them about the ranch, about... He looked at Eleanor. "About you. What do you tell them? That I'm trying to live again, that I found someone who makes me remember what it's like to hope for tomorrow, instead of just enduring it." His thumb stroked across her knuckles. "That I think Emma would like you, that she'd be glad I'm not alone anymore." Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, and Marcus wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. They sat like that for a long time, listening to the wind and the fire and the beating of each other's hearts. When Eleanor finally dozed off, Marcus carefully lifted her and carried her to the bed. He started to leave, but her hand caught his wrist. "Stay," she murmured, half asleep. "Please." Marcus hesitated only a moment before climbing in beside her. He stayed on top of the covers while she was beneath them, maintaining that last barrier of propriety. But when Eleanor shifted closer in her sleep, curling against his side, he let himself hold her, let himself enjoy the simple comfort of not being alone. By morning the storm had passed, but something between them had shifted. They didn't speak of it, but Marcus noticed the way Eleanor's eyes followed him as he worked, the way she found excuses to touch his arm or his hand, the way she smiled more often, a real smile that reached her eyes. He noticed because he was doing the same things, finding reasons to be near her, to make her laugh, to see that smile. Winter held the ranch in its grip, but inside the cabin, something was thawing. The days took on a new rhythm. Eleanor began to truly embrace her role, not just as housekeeper, but as Marcus's partner. She asked him to teach her about the ranch, about the cattle and the land. Marcus was surprised, but pleased, and he began taking her with him on his rounds when the weather permitted. "See those tracks?" Marcus pointed to marks in the snow one crisp morning. "Wolf. Been around for a few days now. Haven't lost any cattle yet, but I'll need to keep watch." Eleanor studied the tracks, fascinated. "How can you tell it's a wolf and not a dog?" "Size, mostly, and the spacing of the pads. Dog tracks around her." He knelt beside the prince, and Eleanor crouched next to him, their shoulders touching. "A lone wolf is usually just passing through, looking for easier prey. But if there's a pack, that's when we'd have trouble. What would you do? Keep the cattle closer to the barn at night. Set up watch. If it comes to it, hunt it down before it takes any of the herd." Marcus looked at her. "Does that bother you? The idea of killing a wolf?" Eleanor considered. "I don't like the thought of killing anything, but I understand it. This is your livelihood, our livelihood. You have to protect it." "Our livelihood," Marcus repeated, seeming to savor the words. "I like the sound of that." He stood and offered her his hand, pulling her to her feet. They stood close in the cold morning air, their breath mingling in clouds between them. "I like being part of this," Eleanor said softly. "Part of the ranch. Part of your life. You are part of it, the most important part." Marcus's hand came up to cup her cheek. "I mean that, Eleanor. This place, everything I've built, it means nothing without you to share it with." Eleanor felt warmth bloom in her chest, spreading outward until her whole body felt lit from within. "Marcus." He kissed her, gentle but sure, and Eleanor melted into him. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Come on," Marcus said, taking her hand. "Let's get back before you freeze." As they walked back to the cabin, hand in hand, Eleanor felt a contentment she'd never known before. This was what she'd been searching for all along, she realized. Not just safety or security, but partnership, belonging, love. The winter weeks continued to pass, each one bringing Eleanor and Marcus closer. They developed small traditions, intimate routines that bound them together. Morning coffee shared in comfortable silence. Evening readings by the fire, Eleanor often nestled against Marcus's side as he read aloud from his small collection of books. Cooking together, Marcus's large frame taking up too much space in the kitchen, but Eleanor loving the chaos of it anyway. One particularly cold evening, Eleanor was attempting to teach Marcus to dance. She'd found an old music box in the trunk with Emma's things, and when she'd wound it up, a tinny waltz had filled the cabin. "I don't dance," Marcus protested, even as Eleanor pulled him to his feet. "Everyone can dance. You just haven't had the right partner." She placed his hand on her waist, took his other hand in hers. "Just follow my lead." They moved clumsily at first, Marcus too aware of his size and strength, afraid of stepping on her toes or moving too roughly. But Eleanor was patient, laughing when he stumbled, encouraging him to relax. "See," she said as they found a rhythm, "you're a natural." "I'm terrible," Marcus corrected, but he was smiling. "You're perfect." Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes shining. "Absolutely perfect." The music box wound down, the waltz slowing and then stopping. But Marcus and Eleanor kept swaying, neither wanting to let go. He pulled her closer, until no space remained between them, until Eleanor's head rested against his chest and she could hear the steady beating of his heart. "Eleanor," Marcus said quietly, "I need to tell you something." She pulled back slightly to look at him. "What is it?" "When you first came here, I thought I was just helping someone in need, being decent because that's what a man should do. But it's become so much more than that." His hand came up to cradle her face. "You've brought light back into my life. You've made me remember what it's like to feel alive, to want things, to hope. And I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I already have fallen. I don't know. I'm not good with words or feelings or any of this, but I need you to know. You matter to me, Eleanor. More than anything." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. "I love you too, Marcus. I've been so afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon or that you wouldn't feel the same way. But I do. I love you." The kiss that followed was different from any they'd shared before. It was deep and passionate, full of promise and desire and the acknowledgement of feelings that had been building for weeks. Marcus lifted Eleanor off her feet, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, gasping at the intimacy of the position. "Eleanor!" Marcus groaned against her throat. "We should stop. I don't want to push you into anything you're not ready for." "I'm ready," she breathed. "I've been ready." "I want you, Marcus. I want to be your wife in every way." He carried her to the bedroom, their mouths never breaking apart. The room was cold, but Marcus built up the fire quickly, his hands shaking with need and anticipation. When he turned back to Eleanor, she was standing by the bed, her fingers on the buttons of her dress. "Let me," Marcus said, crossing to her. He worked the buttons slowly, reverently, as if unwrapping a precious gift. When the dress fell away, revealing soft skin and curves that made his mouth go dry, he had to remind himself to breathe. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "So damn beautiful." Eleanor's cheeks flushed pink, but she held his gaze. "So are you." She reached for his shirt, and together they undressed each other, exploring with hands and mouths and whispered words. Marcus was careful, constantly checking to make sure Eleanor was comfortable, that she wanted this. And she did, with a fierceness that surprised them both. When they finally came together, skin against skin, it felt like coming home. Marcus moved slowly at first, giving Eleanor time to adjust, watching her face for any sign of discomfort. But Eleanor only urged him on, her body arching to meet his, her nails digging into his shoulders. "Marcus!" she gasped. "Oh God, Marcus!" He increased his pace, losing himself in the feel of her, the sounds she was making, the way her body responded to his. When Eleanor cried out her release, clenching around him, Marcus followed, spilling himself inside her with a groan that came from deep in his chest. They lay tangled together afterward, both breathing hard, sweat cooling on their skin despite the cold room. Marcus pulled the quilts over them and gathered Eleanor close, pressing kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "More than all right." Eleanor smiled up at him, her eyes soft with love and satisfaction. I never imagined it could be like that." "Like what?" "Beautiful. Perfect." She traced her fingers along his jaw. "I love you so much." "I love you too." Marcus pulled her even closer. "And I'm going to spend every day for the rest of my life showing you just how much." They made love twice more that night, unable to get enough of each other, years of loneliness and loss melting away in the heat of their passion. When they finally fell asleep, wrapped around each other, both of them wore matching smiles of contentment. The next morning, Eleanor woke to find herself alone in bed. She stretched, feeling pleasantly sore in places she'd never been sore before, and smiled at the memory of the night they'd shared. She could hear Marcus moving around in the main room, the clink of dishes and the smell of coffee. She dressed quickly and emerged to find him setting the table for breakfast. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that made her heart skip. "Morning," he said, crossing to her and pulling her into his arms for a thorough kiss. "How do you feel?" "Happy," Eleanor said simply. "Wonderfully. Perfectly happy." "Good." Marcus nuzzled her neck. "Because I plan on making you feel that way as often as possible." Eleanor laughed, delighted by this playful side of him. "Is that so?" "Absolutely." He pulled back to look at her, his expression growing more serious. "Last night, that wasn't just physical for me, Eleanor. It meant something. You mean something to me. You mean something to me too," she said softly. "Everything, actually." They stood there in the morning light holding each other, and Eleanor marveled at how much her life had changed. A few months ago, she'd been alone and desperate, collapsing on a stranger's porch with no hope for the future. Now she was loved and cherished, standing in a warm cabin with a husband who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. As the days turned into weeks, Eleanor and Marcus's relationship deepened even further. They were inseparable, partners in every aspect of life. Eleanor took on more responsibilities around the ranch, helping with the cattle, learning to ride properly, even assisting Marcus with minor repairs and maintenance. One afternoon, Marcus was in the barn, working on a stuck wagon wheel, when Eleanor brought him lunch. She'd packed bread, cheese, and dried apples, along with a jar of cold water. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, setting the basket down. Marcus straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Thank you, sweetheart." He took a long drink of water, then pulled her close for a kiss. "What would I do without you?" "Probably starve," Eleanor teased, "or live on nothing but coffee and jerky." "Probably," Marcus agreed with a laugh. He sat on a hay bale and pulled Eleanor down beside him, one arm around her shoulders as he ate. "I've been thinking." "About what?" "The ranch, the future." He looked at her. "I'd like to expand the herd next spring. Maybe build a proper bunkhouse, hire on some help during busy seasons. With you here, with someone to build for, it feels worth the effort again." Eleanor's heart swelled. "I'd like that. I'd like to see this place grow, become everything you've dreamed of." "Everything we've dreamed of," Marcus corrected. "This is your ranch too now, Eleanor. Your home. Your future." "Our future," she whispered, leaning her head on his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the barn, the cattle lowing in the distance, the wind whistling through the eaves. Eleanor felt a peace she'd never known before, a sense of rightness and belonging. "Marcus," she said after a while. "I think I might be pregnant." Marcus went very still. Then he turned to look at her, his eyes wide. "Are you sure?" "Not completely, but I've missed my monthly courses, and I've been feeling strange in the mornings, queasy, tired." She placed a hand on her still flat stomach. "I think there might be a baby." For a moment Marcus didn't react. Eleanor's heart sank. Was he not happy? Did he not want children with her, despite what he'd said before? Then Marcus stood, pulling Eleanor up with him, and swept her into his arms. He was laughing, tears streaming down his face, spinning her in a circle. "A baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We're going to have a baby." "We might be," Eleanor cautioned, though she was laughing too. "I'm not certain yet." "I'm certain." Marcus set her down and placed both hands on her stomach. "I can feel it. We made this. Together." Eleanor covered his hands with her own. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Marcus pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "Eleanor, I'm terrified and thrilled and so grateful I can barely breathe. A child, our child." "I know you lost your son," Eleanor said softly. "I know that must make this scary for you." "It does," Marcus admitted, "but it also makes it even more precious. Another chance. A new beginning." He pulled back to look at her. "We'll do it together this time. You won't be alone like Emma was. I'll be there for every moment, every step. I promise you." Eleanor felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I love you so much." "I love you too, both of you." Marcus knelt and pressed a kiss to her stomach. "Hello, little one. I'm your papa. And I already love you more than you'll ever know." As Eleanor stood there with Marcus kneeling before her, his arms around her waist and his face pressed against her stomach, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. This man, this ranch, this life they were building together, it was everything she'd ever wanted and so much more than she'd ever dared to dream. The future stretched out before them, bright and full of promise. A baby on the way, a ranch to build, a love that grew stronger every day. Eleanor had come here desperate and broken, looking for nothing more than survival. Instead, she'd found salvation, purpose, and a love that healed all the broken places inside her. And as Marcus stood and kissed her, gentle and reverent, Eleanor knew that this was just the beginning of their story together. One evening, as they washed dishes side by side, Eleanor said, "I was thinking about the spare room, the one I was using before we married. What about it? It would make a good nursery, someday." She didn't look at him, focusing intently on the plate she was drying. "If you wanted." Marcus set down the pan he'd been scrubbing and turned to her. "Eleanor, look at me." She did. Her cheeks flushed pink. "Do you want children?" he asked gently. Yes, someday. If it's possible. She took a shaky breath. "I know you lost your son. I know that must have been unbearable. And if you don't want to risk that kind of pain again, I understand." Marcus cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't know she'd shed. "I would love to have children with you. A whole house full of them, if God's willing. But more than that, Eleanor, I want you, not just as the mother of my children or the woman who keeps my house. I want you as my wife in every sense of the word." Her breath hitched. "Marcus, I know we're already close in that way, but I want you to know that every time I hold you, every time I touch you, it's not just about desire, it's about love, about wanting to build a life and a family with you." "I want that too," Eleanor whispered, "more than anything." Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it transformed the ranch. Green grass pushed through the snow, wildflowers bloomed in riots of color, and new calves were born in the barn. Eleanor stood in the garden she'd planted, one hand shading her eyes against the sun, the other resting on the small swell of her belly, 4 months along and already showing. Marcus said she glowed, that she'd never been more beautiful. She heard his footsteps behind her and smiled as his arms came around her waist, his hands covering hers on their growing child. "How are you feeling?" he asked, nuzzling her neck. "Good, tired, but good." She leaned back against his solid warmth. "The baby's been active today. I think he or she likes the sunshine. Smart kid." Marcus turned her in his arms to face him. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "Only 3 times. You're falling behind." He grinned, that rare, wonderful expression that still made her heart skip. "Then let me make up for it. I love you, Eleanor Cole. I love you more than words can say, and I thank God every day that you collapsed on my porch." Eleanor laughed. "That's romantic." "It's true. You saved me just as much as I saved you that day. Maybe more." She reached up to cup his cheek. "We saved each other." "Yeah," Marcus agreed, kissing her softly. "We did." They stood there in the garden, the sun warm on their faces, their child safe between them, and Eleanor thought about how far she'd come from that desperate, starving woman who'd knocked on a stranger's door. She'd been looking for salvation, for a fresh start, for somewhere to belong. Instead, she'd found everything she never knew she needed: a home, a purpose, and a love stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. As Marcus led her back to the house, talking about plans for the nursery and names for the baby, Eleanor sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For second chances, for unexpected blessings, and for the cowboy who'd looked at her with gentle eyes and said, "You're not leaving here until I say so." She'd never been so glad to obey an order in her life. The end.